What's up, guys? So this video is about three major disadvantages that I ran into with the GX460 4runner style KDSS system on my 12,000 mile road trip. So I just got back from a 2-month long overlanding trip all the way from Florida through Colorado, Utah. That was most of the trails I did. Also did some trails in LA and Louisiana, all the way to California, right? And the KDSS system on this truck drove me crazy, and it was a big buzzkill throughout the entire trip. So I wanted to put together a video to document for you guys the issues I ran into. Tinker's Adventure already has a great video explaining how KDSS works and explaining the major benefit of it, which is that it gives you awesome on-road handling and good articulation off-road. That's the benefit. The downside is that it's a complicated system, it's a pain in the ass, and it has a couple major issues associated with it. Toyota is aware of these issues, and they've been working to fix them on the later models, so I'll be showing some Toyota footage to compare my KDSS system to the latest KDSS system. And it kind of shows that, yeah, Toyota knew these were problems, and they're working to fix it. Unfortunately, I'm stuck with them on my GX460. So let's just get right into it. The first major issue I had was the ride quality off-road. While KDSS does give you good flex, it doesn't do much for ride quality. It's a very thick sway bar in order to make it handle well on the road. And even when the system is in float mode, meaning the cylinder can extend and travel, it can't respond fast enough to reduce the stiffness that sway bar is putting into the wheel that's hitting the bump or the pothole or the rock, which means it tosses your head around a lot. So let me show you some footage that Toyota put out on the new KDSS system right here. So this is the eKDSS, and this is the first time that Toyota even talks about comfort. So it's actually comparing eKDSS to the old Land Cruiser system, which is pretty similar to my GX, honestly, because it just has one front cylinder. The new system has 2 cylinders and is designed to respond quicker. So this video talks about, not only does it improve capability, it also increases ride quality. It doesn't toss the occupants' heads around. And so basically, for the first 500 miles off-road on my trip, I was the video on the left. It was very nauseating when you're doing 8 to 10 hours of trails a day. That's not how you want to be driving. So eventually, I took my sway bar off, and it was a huge improvement off-road. The suspension responded naturally. I could drive it faster into corners. Yes, there was more body roll, but the comfort was so much better. It was so much less nauseating to drive with the front sway bar removed. Now, of course, when I remove the front sway bar with KDSS, it essentially removes the back sway bar too, right? Because the front cylinder can travel freely now, which means the back cylinder is just pumping its fluid into the front cylinder. But I took the sway bar off, and there was less squeaks, there was less pops, because of all the bushing noises and stuff that go on with KDSS, and it just rode so much better. I actually put it back on and took it back off a few times to verify it wasn't just the particular terrain I was on, and I preferred the off-road ride and performance with the sway bar removed, hands down. Now, this is kind of political here, because there's a bunch of arguments going on that I started about the KDSS mods where people modify their truck to keep the cylinders in float mode. Basically, you disable the KDSS lockup. I don't think it does anything, and I've got some other videos on that, so if you want to check it out right here. I have a mod on my truck, a button I can press to keep the sway bars in full float mode, and it doesn't make much of a difference. Now, my theory there, the reason that mod doesn't fix the head tossing is because of just the nature of the system. It only has one cylinder, so that cylinder has to travel a lot to react to a bump getting hit on either wheel. It also has different leverage on the cylinder depending on which wheel gets hit, because there's only one cylinder. And there's orifices in the system, and there's these small solenoid valves, and I don't think the fluid can flow fast enough from the cylinder into the accumulator to really make a big difference for ride quality. It helps with low-speed flex. It doesn't do much for ride quality. That's my theory. Feel free to check out this video if you want to get into that whole discussion. Okay, let's go to my next slide. And yes, of course, I made a PowerPoint because I'm a freaking nerd. Ground clearance. So this KDSS system that's on my truck really reduces the ground clearance at the front of the skid plate in front of the front tire. There needs to be several inches of room for the KDSS sway bar to travel up and down. Let me show you what the new system looks like. So the new system has a lot of travel here, but because there's 2 cylinders, it's split between the 2. They don't need to travel that full 6-7 inches. My skid plate has to come way down here because it has to let the driver's side sway bar link drop all the way down. So that means that this part of the skid plate on my truck is constantly smashing into rocks. I was with a couple other Prado vehicles, an FJ Cruiser, a 4Runner. They didn't have nearly as many hard hits as I did. I'll show you some footage what my skid plate looks like shortly after this. But on this new GX550 setup, they've actually improved it. The sway bar tucks up higher, so that's not as much of an issue. So like I said, Toyota's aware of these issues and they are working on them. You also need special skid plates to protect your sway bar, your KDSS lines, and special rock sliders. So my rock sliders are overly complicated and weaker because of the KDSS system. The last disadvantage is the reliability and maintenance. So it's a complicated system compared to a standard sway bar. You've got hydraulic cylinders, accumulators, valves, lines, seals, all this stuff going on, whereas with a regular sway bar, you just have a couple bushings to worry about. KDSS knock. So this started happening on my truck about halfway through my trip. My truck only has 50,000 miles on it now. It had 40,000 miles on it then, and I was getting a knock from the front cylinder. And I kept hearing it, and then we got a couple guys on the rock slider and rocked the truck, and you can hear knock, 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 and it's definitely inside the front cylinder. This is a well-documented issue. A lot of people have this problem. Usually you just replace the cylinder. The problem with that is replacing the cylinder involves all this high-pressure test equipment to recharge the system, recharge the accumulators, and the dealership wants an arm and a leg to replace that cylinder. I'm probably just going to delete the whole system because I'm going to keep having issues with it. Basically, it's too complicated of a system to do hardcore off-roading. It works great for what the GX460 is mostly used for, which is taking kids to soccer practice. It handles well. There's no body roll because of the big sway bar. But off-road, it's just too complicated of a system. Now, this is not going to be fixed by the new Toyota. The new Toyota is even more complicated, right? It's got 2 cylinders, but hopefully they've improved it somehow. I think what caused the KDSS knock in my case is that I'm running longer travel shocks, so you're putting more of a side load on the cylinder, and something in that front cylinder isn't happy. It could have got air in it through a seal that's gone bad because of mud getting in there. I don't know. There's so many things it could be. It's a complicated system. Another reliability and maintenance issue is the goofy bushing angles. So in the GX460, the sway bar basically bolts right to the lower control arm with the bushing. That bushing gets tortured. There's some mods to help that, but realistically, that bushing is always going to get tortured throughout the range of travel. And as you increase the range of travel, you put more torture on it. The new GX550 has solved this. There's a nice sway bar link here. So you don't have the sway bar hooked directly to the lower control arm, which means the control arm can flex better. There's less twisting moment on it from that bushing, and also there's less wear. And if you look at this video from Toyota, they do document in here that this new KDSS system has more suspension travel than the old one, which is awesome. And I think the reason that it has that is partially because of this improved linkage setup. Now, of course, having 2 cylinders is going to help, but I think that improved linkage setup lets the wheel flex better. So over an inch more front suspension articulation. So that is huge. That's all I've got. Those are my 3 issues. The issue that Tinker's Adventure talked about was the body lean and when you're doing off-camber stuff. I did notice that off-road with the KDSS. Honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't flip over, and I did some really sketchy off-camber stuff. But yeah, if you want to see more on KDSS and how it actually works, check out my videos right here. I've got a couple KDSS videos on the channel. And now I'm going to switch over and just show you some footage of my truck after all the off-roading and try to point out some of these issues with some actual hands-on stuff. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, you don't like the ride quality at high speed. You need to do the Dr. KDSS mod. Well, I've done his mod. I have a switch here that when that switch is out, it removes power from the KDSS computer, which accomplishes the same thing, right? That keeps the KDSS accumulator solenoid valves open so that fluid can flow out of the accumulators and the sway bars are in float mode. This mod did nothing for me. So I tested this in Florida, and then I tested it for 1,000 miles off-road in Colorado and Utah with multiple passengers and drivers. No one can tell a difference between the sway bars staying in full float above 12 miles per hour with the steering input or not. There's a detailed video talking about this, but this is not a solution for the ride quality issues at high speed. I don't care what anyone says. I've got thousands of miles of testing. It doesn't do anything. It's in the other video too, but there's a light in this switch. And whenever that light is on, it means that the KDSS solenoids are closed. Basically, I just tapped into the signal from the KDSS computer that goes down to the accumulators and says, hey, shut that valve. So I can see anytime my KDSS system is locked out. And what you realize is that most of the time when you're driving, it's not locked out, it's in full float. As soon as you hit the steering real quick or take a really sharp turn, then the KDSS system locks in. So doing this override doesn't do as much as you would think because Toyota was already really smart and put the system in float anytime they could safely. That's one of the reasons that mod doesn't do anything. This is my RSG skid plate, and it is absolutely bashed to hell. And the reason you see the big dent there, The reason for that is because of the KDSS. So the KDSS sway bar is removed right now, but this cylinder has to be able to come down all the way to here, which means that this skid plate has to hang down pretty low and pretty far forward in front of the tire. So there's a lot of situations where this smashes into a shelf or a rock before the tire can hit the rock and start lifting up the truck. I hit way more rocks, I had way more hard hits than the 4Runners, the FJ Cruisers, the Tacomas I was riding with because of KDSS. Their sway bar is mounted way up here. So their skid plate goes back this way before it has to drop down. That means the tire can lift up and avoid rocks. This skid plate got absolutely tortured. I mean, you can see it's about 2 inches higher on this side than it used to be. I mean, it's just all mangled. And that is because of the KDSS system. Also, the skid plate is lower in general because of KDSS. You could have made the skid plate an inch higher up if you didn't have to come down underneath the sway bar. And the sway bar only gets down there on this side in some situations, but you still got to have that space for the sway bar to fit down here. The skid plate used to be lower, actually. It's about 1.5 inches higher than when I started, just because of all the rocks it smashed into. Better look at that front skid plate. You can see that it's just totally mangled. This part right here is caved in pretty good, and this whole thing right here is kind of caved. It used to be straight like this. It's all been recessed. So the one good thing is that I got more ground clearance, and the skid plate held up pretty well. The problem is a lot of these hits and this lip right here, which were the hard hits where it bent all that in and stuff, these would have been avoided if you didn't have to have that angle there for the KDSS sway bar. So talking about reliability with this KDSS system, reliability and maintenance, really, there's two things there. So this system is kind of goofy. Where it mounts here is pretty similar to the latest generation KDSS, but where it mounts on the arms is pretty stupid. So the arm mounts directly to the KDSS sway bar with a pretty thin rubber bushing. Now on all the new systems, there is an actual sway bar link there with 2 ball joints. This means that bushing has to do a lot of compliance, a lot of weird angles there, and it adds a lot of resistance to suspension flex. So not only is the sway bar reducing your suspension flex because it's a sway bar, there's that weird twisting pressure being put on that bushing, and there's no sway bar link to isolate the lower control arm from that moment, that twisting force. So this KDSS system is one of the earlier designs. It's kind of goofy, and because of that, you torture that bushing right there. My truck has 50,000 miles on it, and those bushings are about shot already. These big bushings in here do just fine, but in general, the geometry on this system is not as good as the new KDSS systems, and I got some pictures of the new GX460 actually I'll put in here and show how that's set up, and it's a lot cleaner system. Also, the new GX460 has a cylinder on both sides, whereas this just has a cylinder on one side. So that also adds some asymmetry. So that's kind of the maintenance thing, is that those bushings go out a lot. Yes, there are some blocks to clock that and help the bushings. The problem is if you clock it, now you're going to be putting the bushing in a bind at full up travel instead of full down travel. So you're really not getting anywhere. You're going to have issues on one end of the travel with that bushing getting maxed out. Reliability. So these front cylinders, a lot of people have reported they get a knocking noise from the cylinder. I don't know what that knocking noise is. I don't know if that's air getting in the system or the cylinder actually starting to go out. Most people that have the issue are running extended travel shocks, where you're putting that cylinder in more of a side bind than it would from the factory, and I don't think the cylinder is particularly like that. With the new system where you have 2 cylinders, obviously the torture is shared between the 2 cylinders. Maybe it's more reliable. Only time will tell.